welcome to our October meeting. I'm excited to welcome you guys to the Dr. Matthew Hyland's pilot plant. And Tim and I are here tonight, and we wanted to kind of play with one of the ideas Tim had during our chapter officer meeting around looking at what some fun chef toys are, right? So we brought in a bunch of cool things. We've got, guns that make smoke. We've got high-speed blenders. We've got hand mixers. We've got immersion circulators. We've got vacuum whippers, all sorts of different fun stuff. And we've made a little 3-course menu tonight to kind of illustrate some of those different pieces of equipment while keeping it relevant to the season and to what we have going on here in Maine. So we're going to start off tonight with a lovely little soup dish. And so the soup that we're going to start with, we're going to take some kabocha squash, which is a Japanese pumpkin. It's a really nice squash. It has a drier, meatier flesh than you would find in like a butternut squash, which I find to be a little bit wetter. The kabocha is a really nice squash for purees, for breads, for things like that. Also makes a really lovely soup. I split it, I took the seeds out of it, I put it in a really nice hot oven, and I roasted it until it was tender to the touch, and the peel would come away from it easily. In this pot, I've got a little bit of butter, shallot, and coconut milk, and I'm going to warm this up just a little bit to kind of bring a little bit of temperature back to it. And then we're going to go into what's called a Vita mix. So I know Vita mixes aren't necessarily that cool in the sense that like nobody's ever seen them or heard of them. But I will tell you that the Vita mix will change the way that you cook. It is one of the best investments that you could make in terms of a blender. This is a commercial Vita mix here. This is kind of your basic model. I highly encourage people to look at ones that have this variable speed option. So it's a high speed, low speed, and then a kind of progression here from 1 to 10. This blender will make the very best dressings you could ever make. It will make the purees silkier than you could ever imagine. It is just such an awesome blender. Really, really great blenders. Highly recommend these for every commercial kitchen. Our puree here has come up to temp. It's warmed back up, and it's got a really unappealing looking texture to it right now. I don't know if you can see on the screen, very thick and gloppy. We're going to put this into the Vita mix. We're going to adjust the consistency a little bit. You could use a little bit of water. You could use a little bit of stock. You could use a little bit of cream. It's really up to you. Now, I have found that in a lot of really creamy soups, you find that lovely texture as a outcome of using heavy cream. When you're using the Vita mix, you're going to find that you're going to get those lovely creamy textures as an outcome of the blending speed and the blending function. One other thing to note, when you're blending anything hot, you will have some thermal expansion. So you want to start kind of slow. Really with anything on the Vita mix, you want to start slow. You want to have a hot towel nearby so you don't explode hot soup out all over yourself. We're going to go ahead and kick this bad boy on. Okay, low speed to start. We're going to increase the speed. I think this is probably a little bit thick, so I'm going to I've got a little bit of residual pickling liquid here. If you guys aren't adding a touch of acidity to finished dishes, a little dash of acidity goes a long way towards brightening the flavor of the dish that you're eating. I'm going to go in with just a dash of water here. All right, so we got a really lovely puree now. We're going to take our very simple base soup here. We're going to serve this with a really cool little crostini right across the top. And on that crostini, I've got a little bit of like a sour yogurt or a sour cream here. So we're going to put a little bit of that sour cream on our crostini. And then we've got a little bit of pickled apple and beet here. And then here we've got a cool little bit of pickled carrot. And we've got a few different colors of that. So we're going to put just a little bit of pickled carrot on. Lastly, we're going to go on to the soup with a little bit of a fun garnish. I've still got parsley going strong in my garden, and I used a technique called micro frying. And the micro fry allows you to take a parsley leaf and make it completely crispy and completely translucent so that it will actually stand up. It'll really work for any soft herb. And so I'm just going to stand up a couple of really cool little parsley leaves. And then as the diner eats this, they'll just break that crostini, and all those yummy bits of pickled vegetable fall into there along with the cream. And of course, you've got that really cool crostini.
As Rob pointed out, we're doing duck one way, and that's the duck leg. And this is duck leg confit, but I've done these a little differently than your traditional oven roasted duck confit cooked in fat. Something that when you do it that way in the oven, I find that it's a little bit more tedious. A lot of times if you have somebody that is not as experienced as you doing it, you have very little room for error, especially if you cook it too long. So I used an immersion circulator in a water bath, otherwise known as sous vide cooking. And sous vide is just basically locking in flavors in a bag, submerging it in water using an immersion circulator. And the immersion circulator basically, it keeps the water at a precise temperature. So in this case, I had it set for 165 degrees. I put it in before I put it in the bag, I gave it a quick sear by searing it before I locked it in the bag. It also began the process of developing some really good flavors in there. So it's been cooking in its own juices in a liquid that has like the roasted duck flavor. I've got some rosemary, some apple cider. There's a little bit of orange juice in here, bay leaf and fresh rosemary. I sealed it, put it in at 165, and I cooked it for 10 hours yesterday, and I just reheated it today. So it's an easy process, and it's just one of those things that I've grown to love, and I personally don't think it's, for me anyways, will never be one of those things that is overdone, only because there's no way you can overcook this. In theory, if I put these in water at 165 degrees and I walk off and come back 24 hours later, it's still going to be at that 165 degrees. It's not going to go over that. Whereas if you put something in the oven at 350 degrees, you walk off, forget about it a half hour later, or 45 minutes later, an hour later, what's it going to be like by the time you get back? It's just going to be burnt to hell. But that's one thing that I absolutely adore about sous vide cooking, is that it's kind of a set it and forget it type of cooking. And it's also worth mentioning that if you have stuff like this and you properly chill it during the first leg, it can be something where you have a water bath set on your line and you know that duck is a big seller. Get them fired up at the beginning of service, and then, you know, basically what happens at that point is the ticket comes in, and it's as simple as taking it out, cracking your bag open, and it's already cooked, it's already brought up to temperature. So essentially all you're gonna do is put it under the salamander just to crisp it up a little bit for a minute and a half, and essentially in a minute and a half, 2 minutes, it's gonna be done. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna hand these over to Rob, and he's just gonna give them a quick flash in the fryer for me, just enough to crisp the skin up. Next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna use this little contraption, and it's called the smoking gun, and it's, you know, it's a handheld, just like it would a pistol, thus being called the gun. There's a chamber here in which you put wood chips. In this case, there's apple chips, apple wood, and you fire it up, and there's a little fan that blows the smoke through the tube. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our puree and we're going to incorporate smoke into it. So it's going to give this puree, in essence, a nice mild a la minute smoke flavor. In this case, we've got parsnips that I've cut up, and it's cooked with duck stock and some apple cider. Very, very simple and easy. There's some salt and pepper in here and a couple peppercorns. And one of the things that I did with the parsnips before I cut them is I took the raw parsnips, I hit them with a little salt and pepper and some oil, and I fired them on the grill just enough to get a little bit of grill char on the outside skin of the parsnips. So it's really going to add that depth of flavor to it. One thing I like to do when I'm doing a puree, just so I can control the viscosity, is I'm going to spoon the parsnips out first, and then I'm going to add the amount of stock that I need to that. It's kind of the philosophy that you can always put more in, but you can't take it out. There's a little switch on the back that gets the fan going, and you can see that it starts to blow up the smoke. Cool, looks like a fun little science project. Okay, so to finish my puree off, I'm gonna add just a little citrus with some salt. The thing I like to do is I like to add a good hefty amount of olive oil. In this case, it's probably about an ounce of olive oil. I feel that it adds like a real good depth to purees without adding the butter. For the few ingredients that I have in there, the flavor is just like really, really big and bold, which is going to go great with this duck. I'm going to go with a little circle on my, or big circle on my plate. Duck right in the middle. And I've got some roasted beets here, and then I'm going to glaze these with a glaze that I made with apple cider vinegar and some pomegranate juice, and I reduced it with a little bit of sugar, so it's a kind of an apple pomegranate glaze, if you will. And then as a final garnish, I'm going to use a couple of these apple chips, and I've been on this kick to make apple chips. It's the only way that I can force myself to eat at least an apple a day on a regular basis. So because they're a chip, I eat like 6 apples a day. Duck confit with a smoky parsnip puree, pomegranate and apple cider glazed beets, and finished with an apple chip.
So for this next dish, we're going to do a play on bouillabaisse, right? So bouillabaisse is the classic French dish. It's got some very rustic, humble roots, and I'm going to try to do something tonight to play with those humble roots a little bit and elevate it while also giving it a bit of a Maine twist. And the reason that I wanted to play with bouillabaisse really centers around one ingredient, and that's saffron. And I wanted to use some cool chef tools. So this is something that I've used for a little while and really enjoy. This is called an ISI whipper, and this is essentially a canister that you can charge with different gases. And depending on what you have in it, you might use different gases to charge it. So you can use CO2 or nitrous, or NO2, to basically aerate an ingredient inside of this. And so one of the classic elements of bouillabaisse is called a saffron rouille, which is essentially a mayonnaise, and its very rustic roots often have it kind of stretched out or grow its quantity a little bit with things like bread or potatoes. I decided to take that aioli and then aerate it with some nitrous so that it has now a nice light fluffy texture. In this pot here, I've got our bouillabaisse stock, and so I broke down some lobster, trimmed up a bunch of fennel, had some parsley, some onion, some saffron, a little bit of tomato, and I made a really lovely broth here. Basically, it's a seafood fish fumet, and I'm just warming that back up. I'm going to hit that with an immersion blender here, and so this is a dynamic immersion blender. This is a really sweet immersion blender. What's really cool about it is you can actually take the head off, and you can put several different blades on this. I have it on the standard blending blade right now. It's got variable speed, which is really nice. And these dynamics are really, really a great immersion blender. I like the ones that have cords, but you can also get cordless ones as well if that's what fits best for your kitchen environment. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this off the heat, and we're going to go ahead and sear a little bit of cod and a few scallops. Over here in my immersion bath, I've got a little bit of lobster that I've gently poached in butter. Got a little bit of fennel and onion that have been very gently kind of sweated down until they're incredibly soft and creamy. And then I've got some cherry tomatoes that I blanched and peeled. So these are all of the elements that you would traditionally find in a bouillabaisse. We've got some crostini here that we're going to put the rouille on. So we're up to heat. Going to add in these 2 nice little pieces of cod. I'm going to put my scallop in. All right. Bring that heat down so we don't go too hot too fast. But we do want to get a really nice little bit of color on these. But move things around from time to time. I'm not saying constantly move it, but a little bit of movement is a good thing. It's going to help you cook more evenly. I blanched this lobster in some very hot and boiling water. From the boiling water, I went into an ice bath, and then I only boiled it for 2 minutes before I put it into the ice bath. And that allowed me to basically get the meat set away from the shell. I was able to shuck that lobster out, and it was still basically, you know, like mid-rare or rare lobster. And at that point, I was able to go ahead and put it in a little bit of more like a gentle poach in my saffron broth. So now that I've flipped my seafood over, I'm going to go into my skillet with some butter. And this is a technique called arrosier. And arrosier means to baste with butter. I'm going to use a spoon here, and I'm basically just going to baste this seafood out with this hot butter. And that's going to allow me to get a really nice gloss on it, put some really nice flavor right on at the end. I mean, who doesn't like seafood that's been, you know, lovingly jacuzzi bath in butter? Yes, this is called a cake tester. When you can pass a cake tester through seafood and you don't feel any resistance, then you know that it's 100% cooked. We're going to take our lovely little sweated fennel and onion puree here. And again, the goal here is to put no color on this, but to totally break it down until it's nice and tender and super lovely. Fennel's got a neat flavor. It's got kind of an anisey, you know, licoricey, but sweet at the same time flavor. So we'll just do 2 little piles of that. Then we're going to go in with a little bit of this here lovely saffron poached potatoes. I got lucky today. I got both of my lobster claws out perfectly. Set those right on top of our potatoes there. Put our lobster tail right here in the middle. Go ahead and go on with our lovely little blanched and peeled cherry tomatoes here. And these are been kind of marinating in some olive oil and a little bit of salt. So they are basically barely holding together. I'm gonna go on with our 2 pieces of cod. I'm gonna go ahead and roux up my bread. Set it right there. And I'm gonna give my broth a really quick little buzz here just to froth together beautifully. And one of the cool tricks with an immersion blender is you can kind of develop like a little bit of like a, I don't know, light brothy foaminess kind of thing. But we'll go ahead and we'll go onto our plate. Just gonna put this right over this lobster here in the middle. And then we're gonna finish this dish with just a little bit of fennel prawns. But this would be taking, you know, a classic, very rustic dish and kind of adding a lot of unnecessary fuss to it to make it more difficult.
Especially on a night where you're doing 300 covers.
Yeah, well, but you know, this allows you to sell bouillabaisse for $42 a plate, you know, instead of $18 a bowl kind of thing.
Well, you know, with social distancing, that's the way to go, you know. Less people, higher prices, do that. That's it.